All right, oil prices higher as tensions escalate between the U.S. and Iran in the Persian Gulf. President Trump emphasizing that America controls the Strait of Hormuz. The president also announcing on Truth Social that the blockade on Iranian ports is back on, adding that all other countries can use the strait, but the U.S. will be reimbursed for managing it.
We had a deal. It was a done deal. And then they broke it. They always break it. We've had 10 deals with these people. And so we're just going to hit them very hard. And we're going to keep the strait, and we'll probably run it. We'll become the guardian of the strait.
So, Griff, what do you think is going on here? The president's we've been kind of debating, like, you know, we said, hey, the waterway's got to be open. Nobody gets to toll it. Iran doesn't get to toll it. Now the president's talking about, Jackie would say tolling it. You could choose a different word. I don't know. We could debate that.
Why did all of a sudden you sound like you're from Brooklyn when you were saying tolling it?
You got a problem with my accent thing, what do you think? What do you think about this, Griff?
What do you think about it? I think that I'm ready for the Guardian of the Galaxies, but now it's Guardian of the Strait of Hormuz.
That's what
memes.
I keep thinking.
Move over Chris Pratt. There's going to be some memes if they're not already out there. I should have looked before we came on. But you look, I mean, the president understands full well, as we have discussed on this show numerous times when this all began, that, you know, a fifth of the world's oil comes through there. And the fact that he's now going to reimpose this blockade, it's going to put us sort of back where we were. It was like we were going to maybe get a deal. The president said he thought this deal was going to be the deal. And so it does feel, if we're being honest about it, like one step forward, two steps back. But when you look
what did you think of? You thought the forward step was the MOU, the Memorandum of Understanding?
Yeah. But as the president said in that soundbite with us this morning on Fox and Friends, is that they just keep breaking things. They keep breaking their promises. They keep breaking. They want to do talks, but they seem to be really walking us out. Not necessarily playing the president, but not being honest in the full faith of coming to the table.
Are you surprised that he seems a little surprised by that? You know, like he's kind of saying now, geez, they don't keep their deals. I felt like that was sort of conventional wisdom, basically. Like everybody knew they weren't going to.
That's why you don't negotiate with terrorists.
Well, you don't. But when you separate the Strait of Hormuz issue and the fact that they had it back open and it was putting money in Iranian bank accounts as well, the fact that they then tried to re-exert that control and started striking the Gulf partners there, hitting Kuwait, hitting Bahrain, hitting Oman. I mean, these are all of the people that also are attached to that Strait of Hormuz. And so he's finally said, look, we were already the de facto guardian before, so now let's just make it official. I'm declaring it. And by the way, we're going to be compensated for having done it for free before. Now, this is what it's going to be.
Jackie, how you doing? Nice to see you. Are you sad the MOU seems to be dead, or do you think that's good?
I never thought the MOU was going anywhere. And actually, I believe it was Lindsey Graham a few weeks ago who said, I appreciate, on one of the Sunday shows, I appreciate what the president's trying to do with diplomacy, but I don't believe diplomacy will work and that this is going to come to blows, which is what I've been thinking too. I'm just getting a little impatient with how patient the president has been, which isn't really his style, but he's been incredibly patient here. And I'm wondering what he knows about this situation that we don't necessarily know, and why he happens to be so calm about it. We've talked about this before on Fox and Friends. My mom is from Iran, and so ultimately what I don't trust this regime or any tentacle of it. Ultimately what I'd like to see is a free country with new leadership that allows us to, you know, do a deal where you can actually trust that they're going to follow through with what they say. People who have nothing to do with this regime altogether. And I'm just kind of wondering, like, what is the president waiting for? There's definitely a group in this country who are saying, you've been saying, if they do this, I'm going to finish the job. If they do that, I'm going to finish the job. What is going to be the tipping point where we finish the job?
Right. And, you know, it would appear that the president decided to, and his patience, Jackie, is tremendous that he's shown.
I'm shocked by it.
And I think it was born out of the fact that he realized the gravity of doing something that no president in previous administrations was willing to do. but he also saw what appears to be success in Venezuela, which was rather than a complete regime change and installing people that had never been there running it with Delcy Rodriguez, it seems to be working because of a self-preservation interest for the remnants of that regime. And he thought he could do that with the leaders that were left there that couldn't be killed. But you've got a guy like Ahmad Vahidi, who is the head of the IRGC, who was the original commander under the previous Ayatollah he was the commander of the Quds Force. It appears he's not holding back. They're still continuing to bomb targets, particularly Gulf allies. And so I think the president was willing to take a rare slow step towards it to say, I'm going to be patient, but eventually I'm going to have enough.
Well,
and it appears he's had enough.
Dagan, it was maybe patience. He was also maybe buying a little time because he was looking at some economic indicators telling him we need a reprieve from high oil prices. We need a reprieve from maybe higher bond prices. He doesn't just watch the military aspect of this. He watches all the different elements. Now that things have heated up again, oil prices heating up a little bit, yields heating up a little bit. So these are some of the things I think he was counteracting with the MOU. It's kind of back on the table here.
I thought that the memorandum of understanding was in large part driven by the declining inventories of crude oil and product. They have continued to decline here in the United States, although there's been much talk about a glut of oil. That has not really headed in the right direction here in the U.S. At the same time, long-term interest rates have headed in the wrong direction. That is in part driven by inflation expectations. The 5-year break even for inflation has hit a kind of a recent bottom, but has moved back up, not dramatically, but it is going in the wrong direction. You've seen, it's also a concern about the borrowing that the U.S. has to do to stay in this conflict. And this is just additional, a lot of this is just additional term premium of, okay, we're reinstituting the blockade. We're going to charge, 20% on as a toll, just call it what it is, on oil coming through the Strait of Hormuz. That's about $15 a barrel. That offsets some of the cost of us being in the region. But nevertheless, we will have to borrow more money to finance this conflict. And that's one of the reasons that you see the 30 years at 5.10. So it's kind of been interesting to see how dramatic or how instantaneous the move back in the wrong direction it's been for some of these financial assets. And I think that the linchpin here is the stock market was rallying to new all-time highs in the first months of this conflict. However, there is softness, question marks about the AI build-out and the AI trade. And so you throw that into the mix, and it's a goulash that I don't know many people would want to be eating.
I'm serving that goulash to you, Taylor. What's going on?
Let me start with the softness, and then I'll end on a positive note. So the softness that I'm referring to, and Dagan may agree or disagree, this is old news, but I read it again this morning, and David Bonston was talking to me about it, and so it's top of mind. In the first quarter, earnings growth was 28%. That is huge. And we think about that number as we're embarking on a second quarter earnings and trying to think about a positive earnings season again this quarter. But 12 percentage points of that, so earnings would have been 16% instead of 28%, if not for all the hyperscalers reporting their increases in startups like Anthropic, OpenAI, SpaceX. So 16% earnings growth is really good, but it's not 28. 28 is because I reported a markup on my stake in my private equity. So I think we just need to be wary that underneath the surface, there's a lot of that fragility. Now, I'm not going to say that that's legal, that's GAAP, that's appropriate,
What you're supposed to
what
do.
you're supposed to be doing. But I think underneath the hood, are we getting true like 28% earnings growth, or are we getting something less than that underneath the surface?
Right.
But here's where I go on then the positive news. We've talked about the equal weight versus the market cap. The equal weights are outperforming the S&P 500 since mid-May. So this is a market that is broader, that is not dependent on the hyperscalers as we were before May. That is very good news. Even better than that, the median S&P 500 1500, not 500, but 1500, is now delivering double-digit earnings per share growth. That is the strongest since the COVID recovery. So that's broader than just Mag 7. So I think, we could talk a lot about earnings season. I'm still very positive on it. I think underneath the surface, we just need to be mindful that if this is fragile, how fragile it is. But I do like that this is a market that is expanding. So if you get hiccups in oil, if you get hiccups in energy, the broader market isn't as dependent on the AI as we thought.
Okay.
Well, I mentioned this, though, that 95% of second quarter earnings growth is in just 20 stocks, and 40% of it's in Micron and NVIDIA. And one of the reasons that the market is spooked today is if you look at SK Hynix, the South Korean chip maker. I think I haven't looked at it today. The ADRs it's down over 9%.
Yep.
But over in South Korea, it fell. It would a record 15%, because that kind of speaks to, remember everybody, the rotational AI trade. Well, you're rotating into losses with semis, and there is broad skepticism about the valuations and whether any of these companies will bear fruit or bear the fruit to justify the prices of these stocks.